Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to the afternoon part of this Sunday of the Eindhoven caucus. We have, I think, a really rich and full programme this afternoon, so I really hope you enjoy it as much as I'm anticipating enjoying it. First, we're going to have a panel discussion, and that is with two artist duos. That's just a coincidence that we invited two duos on the same day, but I think it's great. One is the Lisbeth Beek and Jos van der Pol, who form an artistic partnership called Beek van der Pol. And the other is Kodwo, Eshun and Anjalika Sagar, who form also a duo or a working partnership called the Otolith Group. I think it's really wonderful, actually, that both of these groups have agreed to talk from the perspective of their practices. It's always great for us to bring back the discussion to what we are busy with, the production of art, and how art might think these issues through. It's also really interesting, I hope, in response to the wonderful paper of Paul Gilroy this morning, to be able to think about what the potential of the museum is and to answer some of the problematics he raised about culture and institutions being ameliorating spaces rather than challenging spaces. And also, I think, I was just joking, saying it makes me look like I was a great planner, because both projects actually take on a lot of the very important questions, I think, that Paul brought up this morning, namely thinking about how to articulate a notion or express an idea of what that post-colonial situation is and what the colonial moment has added or taken away from our identity. So I think in different ways both groups will look at that issue. Afterwards, we have a presentation of the work of Libia, Castro and Ólafsson. Ólafur will present the work, and the title of the piece, the presentation is called On Avant-garde Citizens and Recent Works. And then afterwards, we have a performance by Surasi Kusuluwang. It's called A Market Action, and it will take place in the tent outside between 5:15 and 7 o'clock. So we'll start now with Lisbeth and Jos, Beek van der Pol, with their presentation. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, Annie, for inviting us. We are also curious if we will somehow be able to attach our practice to this morning's talk. I think so, because I think it sort of nicely falls into place, and also for us that's kind of a coincidence, I would say, or we were not really aware of it when we were thinking about what we would present to you. What we will present is a project that we made on the invitation of the Rijksmuseum. When Paul Gilroy was talking this morning about museums and heritage and colonialism, we sort of whispered to each other, this museum is actually the warehouse of erasure, you could say. Everything that has been collected, gathered, taken, let's say, the past couple of centuries, not few centuries, but quite a lot of centuries, is housed in this or owned in this museum, which of course is a public museum. So the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam is rebuilding at the moment. It's empty. They stripped the whole building from the inside. And they brought the whole collection, which you have to imagine was in the museum, housed in the museum, from the cellar to the top of the tower. So it was totally stuffed with everything that, this museum is owning. And for the occasion of the refurbishment, they transported everything to a city which we are not able to reveal, in the middle of Holland. In a very secure warehouse, I can assure you. And everything is stored there.
Next to the euro.
Next to the euro, yeah. So on the invitation of, maybe it's good to talk a little bit, or to exemplify, or to clarify a little bit how we were commissioned. We were commissioned not by the Rijksmuseum itself, but by an organization called the Rijksgebouwendienst, who is supervising the whole renovation of this building. So it's a state-run organization which is usually doing all these kind of rebuildings and refurbishings of these kind of public buildings. And they have a program of commissioning artists, living artists, to think about, in this case, the Rijksmuseum, its organization, its collection, its history, etc., etc. And we were totally free, they told us, with whatever proposal we would come up with. So it took us, I think, 2 years, this whole project, to prepare, because we had to negotiate a lot with the committee, which also changed a lot throughout these 2 years. So every time we had to retell our story, retell our proposal, and also to kind of sharpen it continuously. And in the meantime, because we wanted to emphasize on the collection itself, in the meantime we also got more and more clear of what we were actually dealing with.
I think in the beginning it's also important to tell that I think the curators didn't like us artists work with the collection, so in a way they were a little bit boycotting us also, maybe that's it.
So what we were looking for, thinking about the collection, was actually something that is not obviously connected to the Rijksmuseum. So this is the building. We will just go follow also the things. This is something that we took in. This is the Fietserstunnel that was closed off during the renovation. It's still closed off today, I think. Yeah, I'm sure. Which is, I would say, one of the icons of the Rijksmuseum, and very important, I think, for the Amsterdammers, because they continuously cycle through this tunnel. So the let's say the closure, or the temporary closure of the Rijksmuseum, has a lot of impact on their use of public space. And it's not going to take for a little while, it's going to take forever, because the museum will reopen not in 2008, but it will open in 2011, I think, something, you know. So it's continuously taking this, and this is an emotional thing, because when the architect of the Rijksmuseum was even thinking about changing this Fietserstunnel, this bicycle tunnel, into the entrance, which would have implications for the cyclists, there was kind of an uproar against that. So that will not happen. As I said, the museum is stripped from the inside. They will take it back to its original state, which was built by, as it was built by Jan Kuipers, completely with all sorts of paintings, decorations, let's say, on the walls, and everything will be brought back to that initial state of the museum. So we thought it was fascinating, actually, that for the first time you were able to see the architecture of this building as well. Huh? So we went to the depot a few times, and that's easier said than done, because also it's easier said than done that you are looking for something that you don't know what you're looking for, but that it is something that's actually sort of representing maybe the thinking of that collection. So when you go there, you have to make an appointment with one of the conservators. You have to give your passport. You have to give your the plate number. How do you call it? License plate of your car. And when you get there, you have this conservator who is continuously, you know, you cannot touch anything. We could photograph, but you cannot touch anything. But she was continuously asking us, what are you looking for? And you don't know, because you are try to find out, you know, while going. So we give you an insight in how this storage is sort of organized. Obviously, of course, they have a lot of paintings. This is the Nachtwacht, one of the... No, not the Nachtwacht, sorry. But
still there.
Still there. The Nachtwacht actually is exhibited at this moment in the Rijksmuseum, because a part of it is open. But this is one of these paintings that attract so many people. Then this is all sorts of things from, I think, sailing, the sailing ages of the Netherlands. There's closets, there's statues, and it's really funny to see them. All these objects in such a context, because they really look like an antique market or something, you know. And you also recognize some things that maybe your grandmother or something would have had, some similar stuff. Beds, shoes. So it goes heavy because it's a collection of the history of Holland next to this kind of huge collection of paintings and sculptures. It also is a collection of daily goods. So it's also, you know, everything that sort of represents how Dutch people would have lived centuries ago, or maybe only 50 years ago. Then of course there's a lot that is connected to war. So here we have the drums, let's say, of the soldiers. I don't know the exact dates, but the drums, the instruments that they would go with on the battlefield to announce that they were coming. How do you say? How do you call
Armory.
it? Armory, yeah. Well, mailing, I don't know. Guns.
Because a lot of it's also in drawers, so you really have to. You're dependent on the imagination of the curator also, because he was thinking with us while walking. And then, so she opened drawers, and then we also came across this leather jacket, and actually it's of how do you call it? City.
He's a city holder. Yeah, it's there underneath. It's a leather jacket. He was a count of Nassau, but he was one of, you could say one of the soldiers, so to say, and one of the.
And he was shot. And you can see still they kept the jacket, and you can still see the impact of the bullet, the black hole. But they also have the bullet and parts of the bones also of the guy.
So actually they keep a lot of history, you know, and also they keep a lot of not only, let's say, pieces that are that you think, oh wow, this is something worth to be kept, you know, but also residues, rests, let's say, of historical events, let's say. So this is the official image on the website of these objects. So that's part of his bone here, spine here, and the bullets. I was kind of surprised how. Not round the bullet is. It's more like chewing gum, but I'm not a specialist on these kind of things. Of course, there's the Chinese ceramics, which has been imported, because now we slowly go into the trade and the warfare of the Dutch government at that time, or the Dutch country at that time. And of course this Chinese porcelain has been brought to Holland and then incorporated, and today we call that Dutch porcelain or Delft's blue, Delft Blauw. So there's a lot of influence obviously of all this trade worldwide, which not only brought in, let's say, territories maybe, etc., but also knowledge and goods that were sort of incorporated here in the practice of creating stuff from that, new objects from that, and incorporating that in the Dutch
But I think
country.
From the beginning it's also maybe important to tell that we were still negotiating also with the committee, which are normally the people who are working at the museum. And one point they also said, well, there's one thing you can't question, it's ownership. Because at that time was also the Goudsticker affair, I don't know if you're familiar with it. Dus these paintings had to be given back, and it was not clear at all. So they didn't want us to question the question of ownership also. So that was a limitation.
Also in your work you couldn't question?
Well, we come on it later. We found a way to deal with it.
This is a dress which was made, and there we get into this history of the Dutch colonization of Indonesia, which Paul Gilroy this morning mentioned that as a fact that at least me at my school, or when I was educated and getting history lessons, I didn't really learn about these issues. So it wasn't mentioned in the history books. There was only maybe small bits and pieces, but the real, or let's say the more precise, or let's say an elaboration on what it exactly was, you know, we never learned it at school. We only knew, let's say, that it was liberated in 45, 46 by the Japanese, and that the Japanese were, of course, horrible because they put all the Dutch people in camps. And so there was a whole, you know, a different perspective, or let's say an alternative perspective that was given to us, and that you sort of learned about. And I'm sure that many of the Dutch people here in this space can affirm that. This was a dress that was made by one of the women who lived in Indonesia for a long time, and after the war she came back and she made this dress from scarves that the British Air Force had on their neck when they were flying over all these areas. Well, they mentioned here like French Indochina. All these countries have been colonies of either Britain, Great Britain, Holland, France, except for, I learned yesterday, from Shirashi, Thailand.
But also the scarves, I think they still use it, pilots. So what they do, you get a scarf in case you get an accident, you fall, and on the scarf is a map of the local area where you've been. And she collected all these scarves from these maps, because they are from silk, and she made it into a dress, and she actually wore this dress also.
Then this is a painting that's also connected to that same history in Indonesia. You see it a little bit hidden, but we get closer. It's a painting of Queen Wilhelmina. She was queen until, I don't know exactly when, 62. This painting was damaged severely in the uprise of the Indonesians in Indonesia, and they kept it like this. So they did not restore it. The cuts of the knives are still in it, and it's sort of a testimony, or let's say, it becomes a document, therefore, of this specific event. It has also been exhibited, by the way, in the Rijksmuseum. Then this is a tongue at the left side, and a finger at the right side. At the left side, tongue of Johan de Witt, and at the right side, a finger of his brother Cornelis de Witt. A little bit older than the painting of Wilhelmina, and we sort of thought it was fascinating that also these kind of weird objects, not only the bones, you know, of the accidents, but also this, which is really, I would say, attest, let's say, to the uproar that was organized around the assassination of these two brothers. Should we explain?
Maybe it's
here?
good.
Yeah, because Cornelis de Witt was well, maybe it's a little bit better to talk a little bit about the history as far as I know it. Johan de Witt was in favor of the Republic, and in the 17th century there was a lot of quarrel, power struggle, let's say, in place between the people who wanted Holland to be a republic and people who wanted Holland to be a kingdom, the House of Orange, what we have today. So it's clear what party has won. Johan de Witt, he was, and that we learned at school, yes, we did. He was supposedly a very wise man who was able to kind of connect the different struggling parties in such a way that they would now say that he was kind of the grounding figure of the polder model. The polder model, maybe I have to translate, the model that you sort of see consensus that we have quite famous for, I would say. So the polder model is really like continuous negotiation and take care that nobody, and especially not the party of the Orange, would be more powerful than the party of the Republicans. So that's the context of this little history. And of course, at some point he sort of also lost power, and this struggle sort of, well, there were some intrigues and conspiracies, also because he liked the French too much, and well, it's very complicated to tell you now very shortly. But in the end, you know, his brother was taken into prison. He was released, and Johan de Witt got a message that he could pick him up from the prison. The prison was at the Gevangenpoort, which is still there today. It's at the Binnenhof, where our government is residing. And he went to the prison and picked up his brother, and while walking out of the prison on the square of the Binnenhof, they were assassinated or lynched, you could say, by an organized group of anti-republicans. And not only just killed, but, well...
They also cut them in pieces and sold them as
so there is
souvenirs.
this painting, which is also part of the collection of the Rijksmuseum, where you can sort of see the result of this kind of uproar, you know. And it's quite, I think it's quite interesting, you know, to also see this kind of barbarian behavior, which today we would say, well, we would never do that, you know. But it's not so long ago, actually. Then another, I would say, more funny and maybe less violent, but still, you know, there's things that can sort of explode. This is so they also have these kind of things, which are buttons from the day that the Queen Beatrix, the current Queen, took over from Juliana, the former Queen, on the 30th of April 1980. And there was a lot of things going on in Amsterdam, squatting against the king, the House of Orange again, and so many people went on the streets, and they organized a lot of actions.
Yeah,
at
there
that
was a
time.
battle going on, and they also did this. Yeah, it's hard to translate. Geen woning, geen koning. Is no house, no queen or something. Or
No
crown.
no crown.
No crown.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, you know, we show you these buttons because we think they're really funny, and we also remember them from that time, you know. But also, what I think is really interesting, you can find it on the internet, because the collection is quite you can access it through the internet. There's a whole range of photographs also of all these actions. It's quite elaborate how they documented everything, and also what they kept in this collection. So these are other things of the anti-kruisraket.
Cruise time yourself.
Yeah, there was lots of demonstrations in Amsterdam, also in the 80s, and well, you know, tegen de kruisraketten, no, it had to go out, etc. They're there, by the way. And after, you know, after all these kind of things that we thought, oh yeah, that's nice, we can do something with that. Oh yeah, that's nice, we can do something with that. You know, we were also getting a little bit desperate, I must admit. And at some point, one of the conservators opened a drawer, and this was a drawer with little presents for a former Prime Minister, Drees. And he was very popular in Holland because he was... after the war, he sort of invented, let's say, the pension for old people, so that they would have money after they stopped working. And there were many. They call him Father Drees, which makes it very clear what position he took in the Dutch mind somehow. And there were many people who made little presents for him, like this kind of portrait made of wires, etc. Well, this drawer is full of presents, which were given to the Rijksmuseum by his family after he died. And if you look a little bit in front of the drawer on that yellow little paper, there's a stone. So we were immediately attracted by this stone, which is actually a stone from the moon. So this moonstone is in the collection of the Rijksmuseum, which actually we thought was really interesting, weird. You know, this is the only object that has not been made, man-made. It's well, you could say it's man-brought, but it's not man-made.
And it's the oldest in the collection also.
Yeah,
it's billions of years.
If it's real, huh? I don't know if it's real. And this stone was brought by the Apollo 11 in 1969. 3 months after the Apollo came back from the moon, and they brought. I think we of course we investigated everything. I have to do this from memory, but I think they brought 21 kilos of dust and little pieces of stone, and this appeared to be one of them. And after that, of course, much of this stuff was given to NASA for investigation. I think also today there's a lot of these stones which are numbered and have some kind of a NASA code. They're given out to different scientific institutions for research, etc. For example, what sort of stone it is. And actually this stone has no such number. It only has a number of the Rijksmuseum, which is, you see here on the back, the NG 1991 something.
I think what's special was that they came 3 months after their landing back to Earth. They came to Holland, and they gave this stone to an ex-prime minister who wasn't in power for, I think, 20 years or something. And so it was in his private possession. And then when he died, I think his son gave it in, I have to look at 1991 to the museum also. So for us this was the real starting point also of, well, who owns the stone and where it comes from, is it real, blah blah blah. So we all did.
Yeah, because we thought this is really strange that such a stone can end up in the collection of a public Dutch museum, you know, while at the same time, you know, when all these space flights were more and more taking place, or were getting in place, you know, of course the Americans planted their flag, but it was made very clear through treaties, international treaties, that it would never be possible for any nation to claim ownership on this moon. Or any other asteroid or whatever. So this stone for us became really the start of this investigation, and also it was something like you could say, the object of desire in a way, or the object of suspicion, because as soon as you are questioning the origin of this stone and how did it get into the collection, and is it actually something that the Rijksmuseum is allowed to own, you know, shouldn't this be stuff that's just circulating around the world in different scientific institutes, or maybe temporarily exhibited for people to see or to touch, I don't know, you know. There's different other ways of doing it, and we were, well, that for us it was really interesting and important, but also quite funny in a way, because it also draws lines to all the other objects in that same collection that have arrived in this collection through all sorts of practices that also are questionable, you could say. And like Jos was saying, they were very clear about it, that we were not allowed to question ownership so bluntly. So we could not, let's say, you know, if that would be an art project, I don't know, but to put it, you know, on the plate and say, is this ours? Huh? Which you could question if it's a public museum. But these issues of ownership, of course, they are around in this little object. So we were determined to somehow dive into it, but also to kind of use this stone as something that is also opening up to fantasy, to imagination. What is it actually that this object is? But also, what does it say about objects in the collection of a museum like the Rijksmuseum? So here is a poster that we saw at Schiphol by a big investment company. You know, deals a lot with ownership as well, earns a lot of money. And during our research, we also bumped into the lunar embassy. Maybe you can say something about that.
Yeah, it's something in the 80s. A guy called Dennis Hope, an American, he claimed all the planets. So he claimed Moon, he claimed Mars, he claimed all the planets. And the whole idea was based on the fact, like in the US, you could claim countries, pieces of grounds, of territories. And I think you have to wait like 3 months or something, and if nobody claimed it, then it was yours. So that's basically what he did. And he started selling pieces of the moon on the internet in the 80s. He became a multimillionaire with this now, so it became very successful. And for us it was also a starting point, because we thought, we also were thinking also in the future, because this there's a lot of commercial going on, like flying to the moon, and we thought, okay, maybe in the future, the Rijksmuseum wants to have some part on the moon, so the collection can go to the moon also. So we extension.
Or dependance if Holland is drowning.
Yeah. So we also bought a piece on the moon for the Rijksmuseum. I think here you can see the deed. I don't know if you can read it, but it's actually pointing out the location, and it's signature, and he's called the head cheese. I don't know if you can read it on the back, on the bottom. That's Dennis Hope.
So it's on the one hand it's very funny, but on the other hand it's also very serious, because this guy is really earning money from it. So he's really a multimillionaire. There's many people who apparently bought acres. Also we bought one, $35. And when we were starting to investigate this, we bumped into people who were specialized in this kind of ownership on these kind of... Is this possible? Like maybe is the stone possible in the collection? You can also wonder, is it possible to own a piece of the moon, and what are the consequences? So after some searching, and to our surprise, we found one of the few specialists on space law in Leiden, Frans van der Dunk. He is a lawyer, specialized in space law. One of the 5, I think, globally. And they are continuously developing treaties, rules of how the world and the different nations can sort of deal with these kind of bodies. And it becomes more and more urgent because, planting a flag on the moon can be an interesting gesture. But Russia recently planted a flag somewhere on the North Pole to secure their oil claims over there. And the moon is full of helium-3, it seems. I don't know what it is, but it seems to be very... good stuff, and at the moment that they are able actually to get it over here, of course you get these issues of ownership, and then what happens with our acre? Are we getting some profit? So also we discussed with this space specialist on law, Frans. We discussed how can we deal with it, and is there a critical mass? And of course there is some kind of a critical mass, or at least you can discuss that. If you say that you are living in a democratic world, no, probably not. But there is a critical mass of many people owning this. So at some point, when this critical mass is becoming big enough, or when the issues become big enough, the interest becomes big enough, they start to claim, and if they unite, then can they create a voice, let's say, that is worth to listen to, and can they then get a profit from their acre that they bought at some point?
Yeah, there was also a claim from a German guy, who's called Jürgens?
Martin Jürgens,
yeah. He's retired. Because his great-grandfather got an act from Alexander...
Friedrich the Große.
Because he did a lot of work for them, and then as a sort of reward, he got an act that Alexander the Große, Friedrich the Große, gave him the moon. So he had this act, so he found out, because when the moment Dennis Hope became more and more into the news, he went to the German government and he said, well, he should go to the US government and protest against it, because I own the moon already, because I got it 300 years ago from... So there's a lot of disputes also, and it's funny, it's in the book, so this Frans van der Dunk is also writing and referring to that.
Yeah, because maybe it's good to tell you now that the project that we actually did for the Rijksmuseum consisted in a few parts. So first of all, we made an exhibition in one of the towers of the Rijksmuseum on the top floor. So we opened up this tower 3-4 days a week. Altogether we organized 8 tours, I think, per week to the top of the tower. So the people had to climb all the stairs, and in between they could peek into the stripped Rijksmuseum, where they could see the empty spaces in the museum itself. Then secondly, we produced this book where we gathered different texts and images around this issue of ownership, about the stone, about fantasy, Kuifje, die naar de moon, who goes to the moon, Tintin, who goes to the moon. How, let's say, all this fantasy is also embedded in culture, and how these space trips by the Apollo and later on other flights, etc., how this kind of contest between the Russians and the Americans was also taken on as part of this very real fantasy, I would say, is in the book. And next to that, we put billboards in the city to announce the location where it would take place.
I think it's also important. So the guide, we had a guide who was bringing up to people, and we wrote, we called it a dynamic script. So it's a script with all sorts of anecdotes, like also the NASA, they lost the original tapes of the moon landing, so they can't find them anymore. And there's somewhere in their storage, but they can't find it. So there's a lot of speculation of people, of did he actually go, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it feeds.
Yeah. So the dynamics for her was that a lot of people came, and they all had their own stories also. So she was always constantly adjusting her story in that sense, because of the information from people from the Rijksmuseum or other people in that sense. And
so here you see it on the top floor of the tower, of one of the towers, and we surrounded it very simple. It's not such a good photograph, but we surrounded it with something like a light installation which pointed exactly to the stone itself, which sort of enlightened it, and the deeds were there as well, so people could walk around and in the meantime listen to the last bits of the tour that Nadine was doing. So here you see the vitrine with the stone. It was also interesting to tell you that it was of course guarded very well, so there was a whole system with cameras and so on, because if this stone would have been stolen, nobody would really find it, you know, it's impossible.
Just a stone.
Yeah. So this is the book. We brought also some books. We have some more in the car, and if you want, you can just take or ask. So this is the content of the book. So we wrote a text about what we just told you, more or less, about the project itself. Then there is a text of an architect historian, Wouter Davids, and he's writing about the loss or the displacement, as you can maybe call it, of the NASA tapes. And Jennifer Allen, a critic from an art historian from Berlin, she wrote a text which is actually her first fiction text. It's science fiction, and it's very interesting, dealing with the digitalization, which also refers back to yesterday, you could say, of objects in a collection such as the Rijksmuseum. So her issue in this story was that actually it would not be possible at some point in the future to touch or to actually see the real objects, but you only see the objects as a digital file, which also means that of course it creates a bigger access to knowledge and to these objects, but you also lose something because you cannot really deal with the aspect of shadows and substance. And then there's a text of Frans von der Dunk, who is writing about all the ins and outs of ownership. And there's a text of Jane Randell, who pleads that after Freud, this was the next, I would say after Galilei, who made clear to us that we are not the center of the universe. And then Freud, who was creating the point of the me and the other, she was sort of pointing forward, let's say, to what would happen if we would really be able to actually move out of this planet to space and to live somewhere else or do our things, whatever that is at that time, somewhere else. And then we collected also many moon songs. So here you see a little bit of how the moon rock is described in the way that the Rijksmuseum describes it, which is of course totally different than a scientific museum would describe it, because they would describe the substance of what the stone is, and here it's treated actually as an art object, which I think is really interesting, of how different museums sort of describe what they have and how they organized it. And here's a list of moon songs. Probably you know a lot of them.
But maybe it's also interesting to tell that after we had some people from the space station.
Noordwijk. In Noordwijk, there's a
European,
space center, European Space Center.
And they found out that actually also one was working at NASA, that this stone was not registered there. So it was also an alien. So they probably, maybe Armstrong took it in his pocket, I don't know, and brought it back to whatever. And they really wanted to investigate it. So they were trying to negotiate it with the Rijksmuseum, like to really scientifically like test the stone. But they don't want it. So it's also raising questions again also in that sense. Because if it's not from the moon, then then what do you have?
And these are the posters that we put in the city, which is also an indication of where the stone had. The GPS coordinators are the exact indication of the location of the tower, so where the stone was at that moment. And the website, of course, is an indication of where you can find it on the internet, which is another way of locating things. And there was a day and a night side of these posters. So we had them up for 1 week in the public space of Amsterdam. And on the left side, you see the day version. And then in the night, when the lights went on, the moon was sort of coming forward. You see it a little bit on this design. But here, for example, you see it a little bit better. So they changed, from day to night.
Because in the OP, we call it OP, so ABRI's, whatever, MUPI, or some OP. Well, anyway, the lights goes on after, when it's dark. So and the moon was printed behind it. So the moment the lights goes on and behind it, it comes forward. And this is stone again.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for coming along this afternoon. As Annie said, my name is Kodwo Eshun. This is Anjalika Sagar, and we have a kind of a group practice which goes under the name of the Otolith Group. And we've been in the Becoming Dutch caucus for a number of days, and we've given a workshop with a number of people who are here. So what we say will be kind of familiar to some of the people in the workshop, but I think there's a lot of people who weren't here for that workshop, which was on Thursday. So apologies to anybody who's heard some of this material before, but we'll kind of reconfigure it differently for a Sunday afternoon. So we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to show a sequence from our first film, Otolith 1 from 2003. And then we're going to show a sequence from a kind of work that we made in 2006 called Communists Like Us. And this was a kind of work in progress. There's a number of projects that we're working with now with the vanabbe, but all these projects are in progress. So we thought we'd show a kind of selected moments from our kind of past practice.
Yeah, the otolith group is, we collaborate with each other and whoever else we choose to collaborate with to make films and artworks. But we also have a curatorial practice, and so the otolith group we feel is a kind of space to kind of have platforms for discourse and also to create and explore a curatorial position. And one of the things we just recently did was to curate a large-scale retrospective on the work of a group from Britain in the 80s called the Black Audio Film Collective. Maybe I should say also that the term otolith, in case you're wondering, maybe I should say a bit about that. The term otolith refers to these calcium carbonate microcrystals within the inner ear. So as you know, the inner ear is the organ that effectively helps one sense of balance, one sense of guidance, one sense of orientation, the sense of back, front, up, down, left, right, one's sense of kind of subjective verticality, one's sense of positionality in the world. One of the ways in which we have a sense of orientation and coordination is through the inner ear. And within the inner ear there are these hairs called cilia, C-I-L-I-A, and these hairs wave backwards and forwards. And on top of the cilia sit the otoliths, and these tiny calcium carbonate microcrystals. So we all have thousands of these otoliths. So we kind of liked this biological fact of the otolith as a way of kind of condensing a lot of questions, a lot of anxieties, a lot of preoccupations we have to do with disorientation, balance, and navigation. It was a kind of enigmatic way of talking about all these kind of questions. So that's kind of that's the kind of encrypted notion of otolith that we'd like to kind of play with. So what we're going to show now is a sequence from a kind of film essay that we made in 2003 called Otolith 1. And very briefly, we were commissioned to go to Star City. Star City is outside Moscow, and it's effectively where the cosmonauts train. So Big Van der Poel's project was very interesting because in a sense they were investigating the kind of associative logics to do with NASA and these kind of fantasies of ownership to do with NASA and to do with the moon, and it's kind of fascinating. And there's a parallel in that what we're looking at is some of the kind of knowledge is produced around cosmonautics and around the kind of Russian space project. So we were invited to go to Star City and to take part in the microgravity training. So we did that, and we filmed that, and some of those moments that we filmed enter into the film. But the film isn't about microgravity. It's not only about space. That takes the kind of encounter with microgravity and the encounter with Star City and the encounter with the Russian space program is part of a constellation of interests we have. So we can touch on those kind of after we show the film. So should we show the sequence? Yes, I mean, many people have seen this, and we didn't bring any other visual material or film material for you to see, so apologies for those who've seen it before. Just to say, for those who haven't, the film is narrated by a woman from this mythical woman we created. She's actually supposed to be my relative, and she's way up in the future. And she's looking back she lives off-world. The world is in a terrible environmental state. It's suffered from terrible wars, and it's inhabitable. And she's living off-world in a permanent state of microgravity. And because she's an exile from the planet, she's almost kind of obsessed with remembering. I think it was Nabokov who said, when you're in exile, you just have this constant sort of, you're obsessed, your memories are far more vivid than normal. So she is, in fact, the maker of this film. She is the person who is looking back at her family and trying to work out, what happened
to the world and what happened to her history. It's also important to say that this film was kind of inspired by the memory of an archive that I had seen in India as a teenager of the kind of delegation photographs and all kinds of photographs which kind of really revealed the relationship between India, Vietnam, Cuba, the Soviet Republic, Japan, China. These images come from my grandparents' collection, and they were kind of socialists who were trying to create connections between all these places. They were actually involved in the government, and my grandfather was involved in the government in India, and he was a freedom fighter and all of that. So one of the areas we explore is this idea of the non-aligned movement in this film, this kind of era of kind of transnational, this vision of transnational socialism, like a third way movement in the world economically. So that's one of the things we touch upon in this film as well. So we'll play it. Could we?
Is it possible to bring the lights down?
Oops. April the 9th, 2003. Her mission to research the minimum conditions for life in microgravity. Her destination, the Eshun 76, on that frozen airfield, shielded by thin trees and ice lakes. In the military coups of Central Africa, that name returned over and over. Eshun 76. The mercenaries' favourite, designed to airlift Kalashnikovs and birth dogs of war. She lost all ground inside that cabin, but I don't think it traumatised her much, and I believe she felt at home in militarised space. Above the air, she rehearsed her routines with the humility of the newborn, sleeping, waking, taking vitamin C's, moving a comb across her head, preparing for a life she would never lead. Funny, I can't help but see the title of her favourite book as a call put through to her future and my present, where we, the beautiful ones, live and work. Would she take my thin hands in hers and smile up at me? Would she see the dialectics of liberation in my bony fingers? A poetics of freedom distinct from that which I discern in hers. Upon reorientation, Anjalika wrote to Anasuya Gyanchand, "Dear Nanny, the Americans call Star City Stellar Town. In French, that must be Les Villes des Étoiles. Did you know it was you that made me believe I could leave gravity behind?" Discovered something here. Zero gravity makes fear elemental, tangible. I have lost my place in the world. In doing so, I have made a friend of my fear. in a new species of space. I have become a new mammal, born in a weightless sea, swimming in a new ocean. She wrote, "All the while I was in Russia, I thought of you, ahead of me, walking across Red Square in 1939, wearing your fur hat and fur coat, discussing world feminism with your comrades. Moscow airport must have smelled of black market Marlboros back then. Airports look terminal now. Customs officers wear sterile masks and military tanks patrol Heathrow. Did the Russian men look away when you caught their eye?" April the 11th, 2003, she wrote, "Cosmonaut Day, Moscow is emblazoned with Gagarin's space-age smile. I walked all the way to Friendship Palace, home to the Tereshkova archive. It was shut." July 1976, Regent's Park. An excursion through the canals, past the aviary at London Zoo. You told me you had met the first woman to travel in space, Valentina Tereshkova. You pronounced her name with such pride, your eyes shining. June the 16th, 1963. Tereshkova's orbital flight on the Vostok 6 makes her the bravest woman in the world. More heroic than Jackie Kennedy, more important than Marilyn Monroe. Soviet Russia's real-life superwoman. 1977. Anasuya Gyanchand takes Anjalika Sagar to see the river Ganges at Haridwar. On the way, she tells her, "Listen to what Tereshkova said to ground control as she orbited the planet. I see the horizon, a light blue, a beautiful band. This is the Earth. How beautiful it is. All goes well." She saw the Earth as I do now. Some things persist. She argued that Tereshkova was a new woman for a new era, a pilot, a parachutist, a woman from tomorrow. What lessons can Indian socialists learn from this, she would ask her students. Can we draw certain parallels between Soviet state socialism and the project of Indian state socialism? Between our revolution and the Chinese experiment? Her husband, the population economist, Professor Gyanchand, asked the same questions of India's millions. Back then, post-independence, an entire generation wanted to know the answers to these questions. Questions that remain in mid-air, despite the triumphs. Anjalika wrote, "There is time. It stands over us, disregarding. It does not ask us to remember, so I know I must not forget the smallest things, the unlisted things, the things that could have died with you." Across India, another girl, 2 years old, took notice. Kalpana Chawla, remember the name. She wrote, "At the Yuri Gagarin Training Center in Star City, I drank Stolichnaya with the cosmonauts and asked them to fix a meeting with the general. "We will try," they said, and toasted the mere splashdown. I don't think they ever did. I don't think they believed me. The new brigade don't have much contact with the old guard from the party, and Tereshkova was always a good communist. From Star City she wrote, "Dear Nanny, you told me you met her 2 times in your life. The first time in Moscow, 1972. You were there attending a conference in your capacity as president of the National Federation of Indian Women. Your friends in the movement called you the quiet revolutionary. Tereshkova came to you after your lecture. Beaming, she kissed you on both cheeks and held your 2 small hands. The second time was 1983 in London. General Tereshkova celebrates her 46th birthday at the Russian embassy. You attend with my mother and your granddaughters. Did you know that the absent Anjalika would one day train where your old comrade had?
It's highly symbolic that at the time the Soviet astronauts visited United Nations, the General Assembly passed a resolution declaring outer space an atom-free zone of peace. The cosmos will be a zone of peace. Such is the adamant resolve of mankind.
It is the dark morning of the flight. A group meets in the lobby of a sanatorium sickly with vapors, bound for an airfield where an aeroplane that dropped tanks in wartime now trains peace-loving cosmonauts. Is it blood or circumstance that drives her? For if it is blood, it has a peculiar way of carrying messages, communiques that keep her awake. That night, the man her grandmother came to know as Bapu, and others came to know as the Mahatma, pays a visit in her sleep. He says, if only the women of the world could come together, they could display such heroic non-violence as to kick away the atom bomb like a mere ball. Satyagraha, or positive action, died once in 1947 with partition. It died a second time in 1948 with the murder of the Mahatma. It died a third and final time on June the 2nd, 1998, when Prime Minister Vajpayee declared India a nuclear state. 21st century science put all its energies into us, the new mammals, the beautiful ones that lived on. 20th century science devoted its energies to summoning the elder gods. The Manhattan Project finally succeeded and called them up in 1945. Death, the shatterer of worlds, first strode the earth at Jornada del Muerto Desert in White Sands, New Mexico. It was born again at Bikini Atoll, then at Hiroshima, at Nagasaki, at Pokhran on May the 11th, 1998. After that, the reincarnations arrived quicker than we could count, deities more cruel than our most dangerous visions. The illusion falls, but not to touch the earth. 25 seconds over Moscow. Above her, cabin pressure, the turquoise of sky. Below, the earth, turning. Serenity at 0 ground.
one, which we made in 2003. And I guess the kind of the broader question of Otolith 1 and how it relates to the kind of questions that we've been thinking about here for the last few days. I guess one way of consolidating and concentrating these questions is the kind of relation to the archive and the attempt to formulate a poetics of the archive, an archive that is equal to evoking the kind of the question of what we call a past potential future. And this notion of the past potential future is a notion that we kind of adapt from the writings of the Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben. It's a kind of a deliberate maladaptation, kind of a deliberate misreading of Agamben's notion of potentialities. But what we take from this is the notion that the one is haunted by futures that do not come to pass, that there are many reasons why the futures that one yearns for, the futures that one desires, the futures that one wishes for and believes in, do not come to pass. And these futures are blocked, they become inoperative, they are halted violently for many reasons, by coups d'etats, by regime changes, but there's all kinds of reasons why futures do not come to pass. But because they do not come to pass does not mean one still does not dwell in the shadow of them. One dwells in the shadows of these futures that do not come to pass. These social alternatives continue to haunt us. We live in the penumbra, the shadow that's cast over them. And we really wanted to find a form that was that could evoke this sense of living in the shadow of a future that did not happen, a future that haunts the present, a social alternative that haunts us like a set of ghosts. And this form of the film essay, which you recognize from the work of Chris Marker with Sans Soleil, the work of Alain René, the work of Black Audio Film Collective, this is a form that we invoked in Otolith 1. And it's a form that allows us to ask in-between questions. It's a form that allows us to move between history and poetry, between the public images of an official archive and the kind of private images of letters and memory. So it allows us to walk that line between history and fiction, between poetry and publicity, and that's a kind of important form for us. And it's one way of dealing with the kind of the post-colonial melancholia that Paul evoked earlier this morning, because one feels burdened by this notion of melancholia, and one wants to pass it on, because melancholia is not individual. It's a trans-individual subjectivity. So one wants to share it. One wants to find a way of evoking that. So we'll show a sequence now from a work we completed in 2006, and we showed, in fact, in Utrecht, in Holland. And it's a work called Communists Like Us, and this also deals with the questions of the archive, specifically the photographs that Anjali mentioned, and specifically...
Well, that we found eventually. We hadn't found them before.
We hadn't found them in 2003, but we'd found them by 2006. So these archives evoke the moment Anjali was talking about, which is this transnational public sphere, this public sphere in which a kind of socialist feminist international constituted itself between India, Russia, China. So part of our project is to strategically displace the kind of over-determining American influence. And what emerges when you strategically displace America as the kind of the overarching narrative of the post-war era is all kinds of fascinating other stories emerge. And what we're interested in is a constellation, is a kind of associative logic that can evoke those kind of stories, those kind of memories. And finally, we're interested in the notion of a constellation that can bring all the materials together and can resonate. So the Communists Like Us section that we're going to show you now is to do with the kind of legacies of Maoism. It's to do with living with the potentials and the legacies of Maoism.
And do you want to talk about the script?
Okay, yeah. the Communists Like Us consists of a number of materials. First of all, there's the film by Jean-Luc Godard from 1967, La Chinoise. So La Chinoise, as you know, deals with a kind of a small cadre of students who are attempting to engage with Maoism in Paris. And what we did was take there's a 16-minute sequence in La Chinoise in which Veronique, the student, who's played by Anne Wiazemski, who would marry Godard a year later and who had just made her debut in Au Hasard Balthazar, in Bresson's Balthazar. She plays a young student called Veronique. She's a fiction, an intense, serious young woman. And she sits opposite her philosophy professor, who is called Francis Janssen, who's a real philosopher. He's a historical figure who actually existed. And not only did he exist as a philosophy professor, but he was famous because he was an activist. He actively helped and participated in the Algerian project of decolonization, and he defended a woman called Jamila Bouhered, who was well known for blowing up cafes in Paris. Not only did he defend her, he married her. So in 67, Francis Janssen would have been well known to French viewers of La Chinoise. He would have been very well known. The equivalent would be someone like Gerry Adams now, or Gerry Adams in a British context. So you have to imagine in La Chinoise, there's this train journey, and there's Francis Janssen talking, and there's Veronique. So there's a fictional character and a historical character, and they're like arguing with each other. So what we did was we took that script and we superimposed it upon some of the photographs from this archive that Anjali referred to, this giant archive of socialist feminist interaction. And so we assigned Francis Janssen's dialogue to the back of the photographs, and we assigned Veronique's dialogue to the front of the photographs. And so we played off photography against subtitles. And then the third element that you'll hear is some music by a British composer called Cornelius Cardew. And Cornelius Cardew was famous for engaging first with Confucianism, the legacies of Confucius, and then secondly with the legacies of Maoism. And in the end of the 60s, he composed a work called The Great Learning, paragraphs 1 to 7, which was a series of musical compositions that were designed to reach out to non-musicians, to artists, to anybody who wanted to take part. So it was a radical project in democratizing music. So we have these three moments, and we brought them into association as a kind of experiment to see what happens when fiction rubs up against history, rubs up against photography, rubs up against cinema, rubs up against music. So it was a kind of exercise in the constellation, and it helped us get to the next stage in our practice, which was Otolith 2, which actually had very little to do with this, but nonetheless, it was essential to go through it. So we'll show you a section from that.
Yeah, Otolith 2, I should say, was commissioned by If I Can't Dance, I Don't Want to Be Part of Your Revolution, which Annie curated with Frederica Bergholz, who's not here today. It was a really wonderful process because in this project they allowed us to explore many stages before we got to actually making this film Otolith 2. So there was like quite a few stages we went through before we got there, and it was and each stage kind of helped us think, develop, reflect on and speculate on this archive. And I just think it's a great way to work. So rather than there being a commission to make a final piece, it was just many different incarnations.
And the final thing to say is that the version of La Chinoise that we worked with has a really terrible English translation. It's just awful. And I think there'll be a future project in which we're going to work with somebody to re-subtitle La Chinoise. So the subtitles that you'll read, even for those people whose English isn't the first language, it will strike you as particularly awkward and clumsy. But after a while, we started to enjoy this clumsiness. So if the backwards and forwards dialogue strikes you as particularly awkward, then that's really particular to this kind of late 60s translation.
Of English. Yeah.
Of French to
English.
Yeah.
Okay. So I hope it works. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe we could turn up the lights and we just have a bit of a discussion. Thank you very much. That was really wonderful to see those two pieces again. Actually, it's been a while, so I very much appreciated being able to look at them. Yeah, I have some questions, but I also really want to make sure we can open to the floor as soon as possible. It's really amazing how many resonances for me between your practices, coincidental as it might have been. It's extraordinary to think about this extensive recuperation or rethinking of the archive. As in Lisbeth Nyos's work, I thought that was simply fascinating to see what was pulled out. I was quite interested in what you said, Lisbeth, and I wonder if you could expand a little bit more, or I know it's a fresh thought from this morning, but about the notion of the museum being the space of erasure, and maybe you were talking specifically about the Rijksmuseum.
No.
Even better, even more polemic if we think of all museums in that way.
Well, I think what is interesting and what we learned actually by looking into this collection of the Rijksmuseum is that you actually find lots of objects there that are some kind of an testimony of a history of a certain country, in this case the Netherlands. And that actually also all these objects, like for example, if you look at that portrait of Wilhelmina or the tongue and the finger, which are maybe the most spectacular examples, you know, of a leftover of a certain kind of event that's totally related to history, not only through the object but also to history, to certain events, you know. That actually all these objects are in the collection and they may even have been exhibited at some points as well, but the way they are contextualized is always, or always, maybe I'm generalizing, is not necessarily, I would say, in the context of this violent recent history. So I had, like for example, we saw this tongue and finger in an exhibition in The Hague for the first time in our lives, which was next to the Binnenhof again. In the context, but it was a huge exhibition of objects from the Rijksmuseum, which sort of took all these different objects as examples of history from Holland, you know, connected to histories of different other countries, like the China. There were also different examples of China pottery or ceramics and so on and so forth. But the emphasis is always on the object itself. So there might be a little bit of an explanation on a little board, but it's never contextualized in the sense of creating an alternative history around it, or not creating, but enlightening the alternative history around it. Because I think very obviously in the case of Johan de Witt and this tongue and the finger, it would be a very sensitive subject to kind of enlighten that, and also to be very specific about the involvement of the House of Orange in that, for example. Yeah.
No, thank you. I mean, I think that's possibly very much why this enterprise is shared in a way, that this pulling out through the films and through this wonderful second piece, communists like us, are about that, no? About that attempt to kind of revoice or relook at the archive. I kept being struck in my head as this was going on by the idea of what Sarah sort of tried to think about yesterday, about this potential of autonomy or space in relation to notions of legacy, and simply thinking that it's in how we remember is how we can move on. One of the things I was just wondering about, I was fascinated also to think about this notion of recuperating archives and recuperating visibilities and histories and pasts. The comment that you made, which was about trying to displace America, possibly by thinking through the non-aligned movement, or maybe you can elaborate on that. But I was also thinking a little bit about what Paul Gilroy brought up this morning, this idea that he suggested that Europe is busy with its own sense of new European project, which is displacing a kind of colonial or post-colonial history or erasing it. It's busy with redefining itself and erasing certain. And I'm just wondering whether that's part of an agenda also, to try and displace this kind of new European project, not just displace the American kind of project.
Yes, I mean, I think so. It seems quite scary to me that this is all happening in Europe now, considering everything that, you know, you grow up with and all the changes that you see occurring around you. And I think it's you know, important to say that the 80s in Britain was a time where the Project for Equal Opportunities and all of that was a project that was, you know, created by the left. It wasn't just a project based on national identity. It was about people trying to find a common ground and negotiate that common ground. And I think it's a very different thing now. And in terms of our work, I think we're in this piece and in Otilis 1, and in lots of pieces we're trying to explore these connections which were kind of have somehow just been suppressed, and that because, for instance, you know, there were healthy projects that went on between all these countries that were colonized and then won their independence. They were trying to collaborate with each other, and that's a kind of history that's kind of pretty much unknown, you know. I think in Holland, people don't even know about their own colonial history, which is scary, you know. You know, they probably have no idea of the relationship between Indonesia and, you know, India, and you know, Indonesia were very much part of the non-aligned movement as well. So, you know, I think it is interesting to draw upon this history, because this kind of movement, I think, its failure, in a way, I mean, I'm not a historian or a sociologist or anything, but I think I have a sense that its failure has created this situation we're in now. I mean, we just try and imagine a world where there's the capitalist paradigm, and then there's, you know, Russia, and then imagine there was possibly a kind of third way. Imagine if, you know, Vietnam, imagine if Cuba, imagine if Allende hadn't been killed, imagine if, you know, all these, imagine if the Contras hadn't taken over Nicaragua, imagine if, you know, the Sandinistas had been successful. So I think it's interesting to reflect on the potentials of these, because when a political movement, a vision is shut down so quickly, I mean, it doesn't mean it's dead. It's taken so long, so many people's lifetimes to get to that point. Yeah, I think it's I think in these two pieces we're exploring melancholia in a way, but I'd like to explore other ways of understanding this idea as well.
Yeah, I mean, people often say to us, you know, isn't this project very nostalgic? Returning to these archives, reworking these archives, isn't this a very you know, backward-looking kind of project? But I kind of differ. I think the return to an archive is very much to do with the present, and it's not so much to do. It looks as if we're playing at being archaeologists. It looks as if we're kind of excavating the past, but actually we're just as much interested in the gaps, in the moments where the archive is missing, in the kind of the dead zones, in the moments where the Caribbean poet Derek Walcott talks about the absence of ruins, the point where you don't have the ruins. We're really interested in that as much as we are in the actual objects and actual collections and actual ways of organizing objects. We're actually looking, and we're actually kind of preoccupied by the moments when there are no objects. There are moments when there are no official statues, no public monuments. You go to London, around the kind of ICA, the Mall, it's still thick with monuments, imperial monuments to this general or that general. They're still there, they're not going anywhere. But you'll search long and hard to find monuments to some of the post-colonial or anti-colonial figures. You won't see them to this day. And the absence of those monuments, the absence of those public archives is just as interesting. And one is looking for a form that can evoke those absences as much as one is looking for a form that can connect objects that do exist in the real world. And so and those absences are holes in the present, and they're very much present day. So one is looking for the absences that kind of mark the present, and that's how I'd characterize this kind of turn towards the archive. As you know, Hal Foster talks about the archival impulse in artists like Thomas Hirschhorn and Tacitus Dean. I mean, there's a reason why artists kind of turn to that. Slavoj Žižek said that at this point in time, sometimes it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. That people are much more comfortable imagining apocalypses and the day after tomorrow and a new ice age than they are with imagining a post-capitalist condition. What would a post-capitalist condition look like? You know, can we really think that through? And I think that's also one of the imperatives that's informing this turn. I think Anjali pointed to that. And so I don't think it's a nostalgic project at all. I think it's like an absolutely necessary one at this point in time. One wants to harvest the resources of projects that were begun in other moments and other times, and are there to be reworked.
I think one of the things that you point to, which is nice, I was thinking about it in relation to our tour yesterday. I mean, the archive is one thing, but it's a mode of speculation, isn't it? And it's about this idea also. Again, Paul pointed this morning. Where's the imagination? Where's the political imagination? And I thought it was very interesting when we were discussing the consequences of Arthur's work yesterday. There was no space between the potential of it being irresponsible and the inevitable death. You know, it was shut down. There was no, and that's what it suddenly made me think that that's what you're opening up, the space of speculation.
Well, fiction as well. I mean, what I found incredible yesterday was that how many people got morally outraged when. I must say, when I first came across his work, I did as well, but I think learning about it a bit more, it sort of hit me that it was so ridiculous. Because the whole thing is a simulation, you know, it's clearly a fiction. And for this moral outrage I just found very interesting.
But the moral outrage is a kind of a compliment, in a way. It's a compliment paid to work in the sense in which a censor pays the greatest compliment to an artwork by attempting to shut it down. The censor pays the compliment of taking a metaphorical work for its literal, as a literal declaration. The censor pays the compliment of danger to the work, and in the sense the people who see Arthur's work as danger pay it the compliment of this ultimate seriousness. What's kind of interesting is when you look back at something like La Chinoise and you see this fictional character Veronique advocating terrorism, advocating bombing these French universities in the name of a kind of Maoist crisis, and I think that's fascinating to invoke that earlier moment of terrorism, and then to play that off against yet an earlier moment of this Algerian figure, Jamila Bouhired, and the way in which part of the interest in communists like us is to invoke these earlier moments of female terrorism and to play those off against the present, in which there's a notion of terrorism which is very topical. One imagines that we are the first generation to live through this crisis of terror, but we're not. These moments recur for different reasons, and part of the interesting communists like us is to invoke those early moments and play them off, to play those temporalities of the 60s and the 50s against the 21st century, and see what emerges as you play off those temporalities and those different modalities of photography next to film, next to music.
Yep, Erwin, we have Gemma, yeah, that's great. Doesn't sound like it. Tap it maybe and just see. If not, you can take this one. Thank you.
Now it's on. You mentioned nostalgia, but you also mentioned another word which is, I think, more interesting and which we discussed before, the haunting or the ghost. And it was interesting to see that you both talked about somehow the moon and non-gravity, because it's the ghost who has no gravity. It's the ghost that floats somehow through history. So I was wondering, you talked also about the ghosting not only of the past but of a future that did not happen.
And I think that's also a very interesting notion when we talk about identity or European identity at this moment. The things that once were a kind of utopia and people were thinking of or longing for, and that did not come true, somehow died, but is not dead, like the ghost continuously comes back and is a kind of appeal to remember what was not done, or to maybe even take revenge because something did not happen. I wonder if you can elaborate a bit on that, the two of you.
Yeah, okay, sure. I can jump in and talk forever, so it's probably best to allow. So, yes, let me step back.
Well, I never thought about the project of this moon project as a ghost-like story, but in a way, I think it's an interesting connection because of the moon that's always there, even if we don't see it at some points during the month, and I think maybe the position of that stone in the collection, to keep it to this project, I think it sort of represented this ghost-like presence in that collection, because it's somehow a metaphor for things that is almost impossible to talk about. But then if you pull it out and if you kind of throw it in the air and tumble it around, there's actually lots of ways of talking about this object, but maybe more in general about the collection itself. So, no.
Go for Kodwo.
Okay. Well, I think it's kind of great. It's kind of great that you mentioned the ghost, because we're very interested in the moments from this Derrida book. This book, Spectres of Marx. So it's a complicated book. Derrida's rereading Hamlet, and he's rereading moments of Freud. But what I take from it, very crudely, is the notion of the ghost is that which returns for the first time. It comes back, but its coming back is a first coming back. So it's a paradox of repetition, but also initiation. So this paradox of something that happens again, but for the first time, is the kind of condition of ghostliness, this strange temporality. So what it points to is a time that is out of joint. And so Derrida works a lot on this Shakespearean notion of the time that is out of joint, the time that has somehow slipped its hinges and has somehow become a complex figure of time in which precisely past, present and future don't really hold anymore. And I guess one of the impulses is to complicate the desire to declare a new age, is to say, not so fast, is the desire to return to a more complicated notion of the post in post-colonial, the post between the post-colonial, the postmodern, and the post-structural. We always want to know that when is this end? When is this move into a post? We suspect that it's long, drawn out, and difficult. And we suspect that it's also differential when you move. It looks different from when you're in the UK. From London, it looks different from how it looks here in Eindhoven. And I guess the figure of haunting is a way of pointing to these kind of giant historical questions that weigh on us, and a way of making them sensible, a way of making them perceivable, making us see them and hear them, and a way of distributing them in a kind of sensibility, as Ronzier talks about. So it's a way of evoking things that are quite abstract and things that are quite difficult to comprehend, and giving them this poetic form that other people can share it. And I think you're right, haunting really attaches to that. I don't know if Anjali wants to talk a bit about microgravity in relation.
It's kind of the unbearable lightness of history, this kind of the ghost.
Sure, yes, that's a good way of putting it.
I mean, just to say that the image that we evoked of the floating image was somehow to kind of give this sensation, I suppose, of not disembodiment, but a sense of it was a kind of speculative metaphor to kind of look at history from the perspective of groundlessness. I mean, she is a ghost to the woman in the future. They're both ghosts to each other. Everyone in that film, all those women, those four women, Tereshkova, the grandmother, me, and the woman from the future, we're all ghosts to each other, in a way.
Maybe when I was looking at the Ottolit one, it also had it's really funny how many of our projects, I would say, overlap. Maybe we should talk more, but it's really interesting. And at some point there was the Manhattan Project, the images of the Manhattan Project, and that's maybe also that reminded me of a project that we did at the Trinity site, which is actually the first test site where they tested the first atom bomb. You must know about that. And you can visit that site twice a year. And again, it's sort of attaching to this idea of fantasy, but fantasy that's much more connected, of course, than the real, than just like fantasy on its own. And so we went to that site with lots of other tourists. You could say it's a disaster tourists, but then posthum disaster tourists. And what I thought was especially fascinating about that place, that there's actually nothing to see. That it is a desert, and the poo of the rabbits is not huge. It's just like normal. Yeah, the plants are normal. Of course, there is something like a commemorative stone, and there's lots of other things that indicated what had happened on that site, and there's a lot of information about that as well. So the whole open air museum, let's say, is put in place to convey that information and that event to you. And the only thing that you could sort of have, besides all these different plates with information, the only thing that you could sort of see that it maybe had inscribed itself in the landscape, so in the ground that we are standing on, was maybe that there was a slight slope, going like this, which was indicated by the guide, but if you don't see it, you don't see it, So I think this kind of area, which is still there today, where something happened that was really huge, and actually the start, you could say, of the Cold War, that had lots of implications, I think is very interesting to kind of think about this site in the framework also of this ghost-like connection. Well.
Yeah, Nessa.
I just want to say, I have two remarks. First about the ghost thing, because I find that the ghost of, for example, the moon, had more presence, in fact, than the post-colonial in the museum. I find the post-colonial more. I don't know if it even reaches the level of the ghost, because it's absent. In comparison to the moon, which is more the rock or the stone, which is more present. And the other thing is the terrorism question, like this Jamila, who is like you talk of her as a terrorist, because it could also be a point of view from the point of view of the resistance movement of Algeria as a war, as a resistance. And then, but it was very subtly said in the video as the difference, like you mentioned, that the difference between her and just a real terrorist is that there is a whole people behind her. Because then the colonial, like in the video, we don't see the colonial as a terrorist, because he has a specific status of the colonial, who with all the negative, but also the positive things that dominant history attributes to the colonial. Thanks.
I mean, when I was growing up, I wanted to be a terrorist. I thought it was like a really great thing to be, In fact, I was arrested once in Paris for suspicion of being a terrorist. So I kind of, I found the whole idea of being a terrorist like very interesting, and, to be, leading. I didn't see it as something negative. I saw it as, to be kind of somebody who's an agent of resistance. So to me, this whole thing that's happened around, terrorism is kind of shocking, really. The way that I grew up with terrorism, with the IRA in London. It didn't seem abnormal to me that if you are colonizing another country and you're, disturbing other people, you're going to experience the after effects of that, which is terrorism. So it's like
here I'm not expressing my point of view. I don't agree, of course, with bombing innocent people. That's not my position. But it's just like how difficult it is. Maybe let's say it from a theoretical point of view or from a symbolic, when you present such things, that it somehow makes me feel uneasy a bit. I mean, the different perspectives. I mean, how you would see like a resistance or occupation. And when we just put the word, like we use the word terrorism, and then it loses its depth because we would use it alternatively for both situations.
Yeah, clearly, Jamila Bouhired was a resistance fighter. Algeria was occupied, and clearly her bombings of these Parisian cafes were part of a very clear political strategy of resistance. That's totally clear. I think I was referring more to the way in which Veronique, this fictional figure, invokes that resistance, and in doing so, kind of conflates the memory of Jamila Bouhired via this imaginary investment in Maoism. And so in this conflation, or this slippage, there is a kind of slippage between what we think of as a clear idea of anti-colonial resistance, which is very clear, and a more adolescent infatuation with the figure of oneself as striking terror into the university. And it's more the way in which Godard plays with that slippage between a historical moment and a fictional investment in that moment, and then our relation to that now, to that moment of fiction and history. And it's an awkward one, absolutely, it's a slippery one, but of course this slippage is fascinating, because we're dealing with kind of multiple entries into a kind of long and complicated history of colonial trauma and politics. And I think the key is to try to, we were trying to find a way to inhabit that, and find a way to complicate the kind of normative accounts of terrorism that circulate and that attempt to simplify these questions in terms of fixated accounts, the figure of the bomber, the figure of these fixations that circulate and try to manage a very complicated account. Turning to Godard, turning to this archive, turning to Kodwo is just our way of kind of opening the archive again and saying these questions aren't so simple. Think about them again through the optic, through the double optic of then and now, and what emerges is something richer. So yeah, I take your uneasiness. I totally understand your uneasiness. We also are uneasy, but we kind of want to share our unease. We want to find a way to pass it on so it stops being us and becomes everybody's.
But also, you don't have to blow up innocent people to be a terror. There's lots of ways of destabilising systems without blowing up people. So.
I think this uneasiness is a really interesting point, because it goes back to what I keep thinking about when Homi Bhabha talked about this notion of the need to transmit cultural barbarism, the need to, whether that's past or present, but to occupy that position in a difficult way rather than to simply represent it or inadequately sort of ameliorate it or erase it. This kind of sense somehow of occupying it and needing to transmit its discomfort or its pain or its problem, which I thought for me was a very powerful and interesting way of thinking of our possibilities as creative people also, and that responsibility. And that was faced actually with a monument to the Holocaust and his feeling of a completely inadequate response to this and not understanding how to deal with that. So it's, yeah, interesting. Thank you for that question. Do we have some more questions? Oh, come on, I'm sure we do. And not from the gods up above? Also not. Okay. Would you guys like to make any more comments before we close?
And I think the challenge is to kind of, you know, when you were talking about Homi Bhabha placed with this monument to the Holocaust, I think there is a way that trauma can just be turned into a tourist trap, you know, and it can just be written about and put on a shelf. So I think there is a challenge, and I mean that's true. How do we not bring trauma back, not lament about it, but how do we inscribe it into the present in a way that is in a way that helps us retain our empathy and our understanding.
I'd like to thank you all, Anjalika, Lisbeth, Kodwo, and Jos. Thanks very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
We are going to start with the artistic presentation after this, but I'd like to say two rather boring housekeeping things, which are, one, if you have your bags in the museum actually closes. I don't know if anybody came in the front entrance, but it closes at 5, and this part of the building remains open. So in case you're late, maybe you'd like to take just 5 minutes now before we go on to fetch your bags, if they're in the lockers, and then just come back here. And the second thing is, I'm afraid the cafe is occupied at the moment with a kind of reception, so I don't think we'll really keep it as a short break now, just 5 minutes, and then we'll start with Ólafur, and then of course we'll have drinks afterwards, I promise that. Well, I feel quite inadequate after such an introduction. I'm just here to welcome Ólafur Ólafsson, who's going to talk about do our artist presentation today, and that is his practice with Libia, Castro. So we're a lot of artist partnerships today, which is very nice and very interesting way to think about working. And the title of the presentation is called On Avant-garde Citizens and Recent Works. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie, and Charles, and the rest of you for inviting us. Greetings from Libia, by the way. She would very much like to be here, but she can't. She's in Spain. And hi, Libia. She's probably watching. As I was just saying to Annie, I'm kind of spinning my brain where to cut down. A little too much material, which I embarked on. What I showed you here what I will show you is, I'll give you a very quick introduction on each works. And this is the first work that I showed here is an ongoing campaign. And I will show that one quickly, then I will show another work we did in Iceland in 2005 called Chapter 3, The Noise of Money. And then I will show a not so short trailer of our recent project, or most recent project, Avant-garde Citizens, which is, well, until so far it is a collection of video documents or video testimonies of illegal migrants or undocumented migrants in the Netherlands, and lately from an activist also, as well as to undocumented migrants in Cairo, but that is in process. But so this work that I showed you here in the beginning, and I will show you another one of it, is the ongoing campaign, Your Country Doesn't Exist. It started in Istanbul, 2003, and it was during our residency there at Platform Guarantee for a half a year, and at that time the war was breaking out in Iraq, and the question of there was a state of emergency being felt, and I had never been being from Iceland, I had never been so close to war actually at that time, for example. And it was one of the reasons why we came up with this work, with this campaign, one of much more, was a statement from the Prime Minister of Iceland and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, which they did on their own without any parliamentary discussion or with the nation or whatever, that they announced a statement that they, or on behalf of me and the population, the nation, that Icelanders were not people that went behind their words. So they fully supported the war on Iraq. And there had been no prior discussion, as I said, so it was totally their own statement, and it was the first time that Iceland supported war. Iceland is a country that doesn't have an army. So that's what triggered this work. And since then it has been an ongoing campaign. What you see here is a television advertisement from Iceland. prime time, but kind of a slideshow stuff.
Plötur vikunnar í Reykjavíkurborg og nýja plötu með Led Zeppelin njótið ver Rás 2.
Same music for the last 7 years.
Sjálfsbjörg Landssamband fatlaðra, sumarhappdrætti 2003, 104 glæsilegir vinningar. Íbúar Kópaskeirs og nágrennis Ríkisútvarpið hefur sett upp nýja sendi á Kópaskeri fyrir Rás 1 á 101,3 megariðum og fyrir Rás 2 á 88,7 megariðum. Hér kemur auglýsing frá Libíu og Ólafi, landið þitt ekki til, landið þitt ekki til. Fasteignablaðið á mánudögum, morgunblaðið.
So that was that. What the person said mainly was here follows an announcement from Libia and Ólafur. Your country doesn't exist, your country doesn't exist. And this was just within the television advertisement just before the news or prime time. And we heard it also on radio, and there the effect of, let's say, the George Orwell effect was even stronger. Not as of an invasion of somebody taking something or claiming something of you, but that's something that you thought you had was being told you that it didn't exist. So yeah, too many people, they experienced it in different places. Listening to the radio of the latest shoe prices or whatever, and then all of a sudden the news reporter told them that their country didn't exist. And it was a message from some Ólafur in Libya. Next work I will show you is Chapter 3, The Noise of Money. That is a work we did in Iceland in the year 2005. We had been at that time, or until that time, been working on site-related experiential environments, playgrounds, or we have many words for them, which we had worked in the way that we would travel to a place, and we would work in the surrounding of a given space, and we would go there and we would work in the surrounding about 2 months, 3 months, up to half a year, like we did in Platform or in Istanbul, and create a synthesis of our experience in the city or of the neighborhood of the given place, and then work that out in the space in a spatial experience, non-objectified, not hierarchical spaces, where we would reflect on our experience, as I said, and we would go through a process of working very informally with many people, both professionals, urbanists maybe, and as well as people who would meet from the street sellers, etc. But for the work we did in Iceland, Chapter 3, we moved away from certain mass of materials, let's say, certain complexity, and we minimized it, and we kept it, we stripped it down to, at the end we stripped it down to sound. We had for a long time we had for some time at that point been working with oral history in different ways and forms, recording stories from people, and we decided for this work to work on a rapidly and an extremely new situation in Iceland of migration in relation to globalization and migration in the world. As I was a kid, I remember 2 black people in the country, and one of them was a basketball player and the other one was an office worker in Reykjavik. But that has changed tremendously, and you just, in each of our visits to the city and to the country, we would feel that. So we had been wanting to do a work on this for a while, and then we decided to do this work, Chapter 3, The Noise of Money. Chapter 3, the title we decided as kind of relating to a new chapter in the history of Iceland. There is a radical change. I mean, Iceland is an example of a nation state where a nation and state is one thing, where there's only one nation, only one ethnic group. So it's like if you Google on Wikipedia nation state, and you get Iceland as the key example. And so there is a radical change in the situation now, and at some point there is some discussion, and at some point there is a lot of discussion missing. And what we wanted to do was we took the fish industry of Iceland, which has been the backbone or the basis of the economy, not always, but for a century about, and that is like in very many ways the sort of essence of the society. Everybody at earlier generations, me not, I never worked in the fish, but my sisters and brother, they all worked in the fish. They're older than me, and so there is a change now with the new generation. So fish fabrics are mainly, or up to 50%, up to 60%, whatever, I don't know the statistics, is the employee is foreign, is from all over, from Yugoslavia, from South America, from Poland, from Asia, and so the younger generations are losing the familiarity with the history and with the production, as well as the industry is getting, of course, or it's getting more of an industry. So before it was more like children, also it would be more of a family thing, and it has become also more dangerous and so. But I will just start with it. So what we did, we interviewed, or we recorded migrants in the country, and we did a sound recording, migrants in the country and older Icelanders. So we wanted to get a feeling of this change, both of the industry, the fish industry, and the fish industry itself, how it might have changed, and the people, and then we juxtaposed that with a 1 hour recording, sound recording of a fish fabric. In the beginning we wanted to make a film, etc., but at the end we cleaned out and we stick by the sound. So I will just move into showing you here documentation of it. Sorry, there are some what I find annoying text in between, but if you don't mind, I will just call it a bit quicker. Sorry. And sorry, I forgot to tell you the sound of money. That is there's a twist on the saying in Iceland, or on the known phenomenon of the
most important is
smell of money. Explain it.
Thing which you still have to be fully addressed, and then with the language. As some of the Africans or some of the immigrants have got frustrated with it, that they succumb to the menial job that have been given and said, to hell, I don't need to learn the Icelandic language, because some of them who are fish workers, who work in the fish factory, they are not in there but foreigners, all of them. So,
and the museum is called Museum IC, which is the museum of the labor union. And as you can see, the staff was wearing the same sort of headphones as yeah, well, you can read this one.
Actually, I have no tale to tell. There is only one story. Every other day it's the same. Fishing and sheep and shark. I guess I'm best known for hunting sharks. I guess it was not so much hunting, but it was considered good if you caught over the spring 20 to 30 sharks. I got once about 70.
Talking sometime about to send me back to my country. I don't want to live here. I don't want to go anymore back to my country.
Why don't you want to?
Because what they are doing, people, I don't accept that. Even my religion, I don't accept it.
So this was the only person that we interviewed that didn't have that was an asylum seeker. The rest were all migrants living in Iceland with papers. And as you saw the space, this was a very different experience of the space than a normal exhibition would be in this place, because we opened up, I mean the normal exhibition site or spaces of this museum, we probably enlarged them some doubled or tripled, because there's just actually 3 of the spaces that the museum has that are for exhibitions, and like the kitchen or the terrace upstairs and the basement and the toilet and all these spaces that we opened up to, they are normally not accessible, but we found the building, we wanted to emphasize this flow, and that's why we chose for using the sound, and we left more or less all the objects, so there was no, so it was just like a kind of a flow going through the whole building and out of the building and into the garden. And it came out of, I mean, we had been working a lot in the environments before, and the concept that we use a lot is porosity, or porosity between inside and outside, and the flowing between impurity and porosity, let's say. I wanted to show you now like a not so Hollywood-like trailer that I made of the work Avant-garde Citizens, the video portraits or testimonies. I think I will have to skip 2 of them. I think I will have to choose 2 of them, and then at the end I will show you the latest one, or a fragment of the last one, which is a Dutch person, an activist that was being arrested for blockading or barricading together with more people a deportation center. And she tells from the hilarious, and not so hilarious, worrying situation also, and that the police wanted to detain her as a fremdeling, as a stranger, as an alien in a detention center based on the migration law due to the fact that she didn't want to provide her name, address or passport. So she was put to prison as a foreigner. First case of that here in the country, I think. And Avant-garde Citizens is it came out of an invitation for a show that was in the summer in Rotterdam by Centrum Bildende Kunst, Center of Visual Arts and Tent, actually in relation to their 25 years anniversary and the 300 years commemoration of the French philosopher Pierre Bailly, who fled France and got asylum in Holland, and has therefore sometimes been called the philosopher of asylum seekers or and so on. But when we started to, and the show was called The Vreemdeling, the foreigner. And when we started to look at the work of Pierre Bailly, at the end we couldn't find much in a way for us to build on. But we started looking at some other philosophers, and then we came across a text from Hannah Arendt. It was called We Refugees. And after we had started developing the idea of taking further, let's say, the oral history and the interviews or recordings we had been doing with immigrants and asylum seekers that we had been doing before, we decided now to focus on the prisons, on this new existence of detention centers and deportation centers, and the fact that the first one in the Netherlands opened in Rotterdam 2003 only, which is quite recent. And now I think there are about 6 or 7. I don't have the exact number. And firstly, we wanted to film actually testimonies from the people in the prison, knowing kind of that 99% that would not be possible. But you have to want the you have to try it still. But that brought us in contact with a visitor group. We had no idea of the detention centers and all their structure or how that works. But we got into a connection with a visitors group that arranges visits to prisoners or to detained people. And through them we got in contact with people who had been in the detention centers in the Netherlands and had been released. And so we found people that were willing to tell the story of where they came from and of their experience in the detention centers. And afterwards, and this was the first time that we decided to film these stories or any of the stories we had been recording. So there was a new step for us, and in relation to that fragility of the people of not having documentation, we decided to on the form of filming them from the back, facing or looking away from the camera and into the landscape, because we decided to film it in the landscape since we could not film it in the prison. Then we decided to go for the opposite and go for the free image, go for the free space, which is also then again not so easy to find in the Netherlands. We had either you had tourists passing behind you or you had an angry farmer coming asking you what you were doing. And I remember I told one of the farmers that I was making a surprise film for a school friend. And then we were allowed to stay a little bit on his land and finish the film. But maybe I wanted to, because I was actually checking in relation to this lecture, I started reading the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and I was thinking of just reading for you here a few articles very quickly, just kind of to, of course we all know it by heart, isn't it? But just to refresh our memory. Article 3, and it was agreed upon in the year 1948 by the United Nations General Assembly. Article 3, everyone has the right to live, everyone has the right to life, liberty and security of person. Article 6, everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. Article 9, no one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention or exile. Article 12, no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks. Well, I read this one especially because just about 4 days ago, the police and some officials of the city rushed into my apartment, and after I had invited them, to a control, which people were actually living in this apartment, and when I politely invited them to my living room, then I just saw that one of them just went straight into my sleeping room and then into the shower room and started opening closets, and that turned out then to be the police. And I just asked her, "Please, what are you doing? You have no rights to start to open my closets." And she told me these were police procedures, and she was doing this to protect her safety. I said if she was so afraid of my apartment, she should have stayed out of it. Article 15, 2. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality, nor denied the right to change his nationality. Okay, so I will just, without further ado, start. Oh. Sorry.
Is it okay? Okay. I am a Liberian citizen from the Republic of Liberia, and then I came here to this country, the Netherlands. I came here since 1993, and the reason that I came to Holland was that I was a member of the NPFL. That is the National Patriotic Front of Liberia.
Sorry, just I wanted to say that these are, I forgot to say that each of these stories that you will see is like a one take video. So, but what I did now, so there are 4 stories. I will see how many of them I will show you now, but so they're quite long. This one is 35 minutes. Another one is 27 minutes, another one is 10 minutes, another one is 21 minutes. But I made like I said, this trailer, so there is like, so I selected moments and there is editing, but I didn't change any order of appearance.
Which was headed by Mr. Charles Gange Taylor. I joined this group because I was forcefully forced to join this group so that I will be able to remove the dictator president of President Samuel Canyon Doe. I don't have the choice rather than to join this group, because if you don't join, you will be killed. I have a lot of friends who refused to join this NPFL and they were killed. So I joined, and then we had our training in Burkina Faso. We have some other training also in Libia. We have some other training. Our final training took place in Ivory Coast. And a town in Ivory Coast is called Danani. We obtained a lot of traineeship, assistance from the president of Burkina Faso, President Blaise Compaoré. we started our training, and then we finished the training in Abidjan, and then we entered the country of Liberia on the 24th of December 1989. Our final mission, we were told, just to forcefully remove the dictator, President Samuel Kodwo from power. And then I found out that my life became in danger. Also, I was promoted to be one of the bodyguard of Castro. So my life became more serious in danger. Then as I ran away from those people because I was also arrested to be killed. The other group, some of the bodyguards were arrested because of the conspire to assassinate Castro. And then we were arrested. Few of us got a chance, and then we escaped. The other remaining 12 or 13 were executed. So that was how the whole thing happened. Then I submitted myself to the ECOMOG, but then the ECOMOG, they enter Monrovia, they enter Liberia through the free port. It's called Monrovia. And they are forces, West African peacekeeping soldiers. They came from Ghana, Sierra Leone, Guinea, Nigeria, Gambia, and some other African countries. So I entered their territory, and I gave myself out to them, and then I told them all the situations going on behind the line of the NPFL. So they find my story to be credible, so they decided to help me to leave the country. So actually, I took ship from the Freeport. I don't know exactly where the ship is going, but I can remember that it's a cargo ship from Greek. So this very ship took me all the way, a couple of days. I think between 16 to 19 days, I found myself at a port. And then I asked which place we have reached. They said that this is the port of Rotterdam. And as far as I know, Rotterdam is a city in a country called the Netherlands. So I asked them if they can help me so that I will give myself to the authorities. And then from the port, they sent me to some people like the Red Cross or whatsoever, and then they directed me to a place, a camp. It's called Auschwitz in Eindhoven. There I asked my political asylum. I indeed had a passport a couple of years back. The passport was expired, so they took it to the Liberian consulate to have it renewed. And then they went to renew that particular passport, and then they sent me back to Liberia. I went to Liberia with 4 of the Netherlands military police. In the Netherlands world, it's called the Maréchaussée. They went with me to Liberia, and then when we were arrived in Liberia, they handed over I was already chained, because I told them that I cannot go back to Liberia. My life was already in danger there. So I arrived back in the Netherlands, where finally I spent almost, I think, 28 days in the Liberian prison. And then they have to return me back again to Belgium, from Belgium to Holland. Then I came back also, I was still detained again in the prison. So they have to go back to the Liberian embassy again in Brussels, and then to demand another papers again. And then the Liberian embassy told them that no, she had enough, she don't want to get involved in my situation anymore. So anything they wanted to do, they can do, but the officials from the Liberian consulate in Brussels, they don't want to get involved anymore. I was still in the prison until I was released. It was, I think, December 24th, that is 2006, I was released. So to be honest, I spent 13 good months in the Netherlands prison. I saw a lot of inmates who already have their procedures or process taking place going on, but still the IND say that no, they have to deport them, they have to send them back to their countries. Some of them refused because they say that, well, I haven't received a letter from the court that I have to be detained, so it's not possible that we will go. And then they have to beat some of them seriously in the prison with blood. They have to bring ambulance, and then they come to take some of them. We don't know what's taking place. Either some of them died or not, but all those things taking place in the middle of the night. So we can only hear beatings. We can only hear screaming. We can only hear people crying in the prison there. And all those things taking place at the 16th oven.
Goed. Ik from Uzbekistan. Vroeger, dat is Sovjet-Unie. Op dit moment Uzbekistan is apart land. 17 jaar geleden, mijn huis kwam probleem. Dat is Wahhabisme. Wahhabisme, dat is radicaal islamitische groep mensen. Nu, bijna hetzelfde wat is Al-Qaeda en andere. Ja, ik ben orthodox, Russisch orthodox. Daarom, ik moet weg voor Uzbekistan. Detentiecentrum, ik kan niet gebruiken mijn medicatie altijd. Detentiecentrum, ik kan niet heb afspraak met mijn dokter. Eén keer 3 maanden, ik moet bloedcontrole en mijn dokter, infectionist, moet kijken. Misschien voor mij nodig wisselende medicatie, misschien nodig andere. Daarom is mijn immuniteit niet werken. Klein beetje infectie en ik mag dood. Ja, dus mensen, alles begrijpen, alles. Nou, kan niet helpen voor jou. Jij spreekt voor jou niet luisteren. Andere probleem, ik heb contusie, ik heb posttraumatisch syndroom, ik heb psychische probleem. Ik krijg medicatie ook, moet krijgen, nu detentiecentrum, daar een beetje heb probleem, nu straks voor mij alles terug. Nu, daar kamer naar 4 personen. Ik kan niet slapen met andere mensen in kamer. Dat is moeilijk voor mij. Begrijp? Dat is stress, ik kan niet slapen en dat is kapot. Ik spreek met iedereen, met dokter, met hoofdafdeling, met alleen ja, volgende week. Ja, volgende week. Ja, volgende week. Straks ik niet slapen iemand, kapot.
Sorry, I would speed up a little bit.
En zodat ik mag rustig blijven. Nu, dit is kost voor mij 31 kilo.
Hungerstrike.
Ja, straks ik terug nieuw kamer. Ja, beter. Nu, evangelist is evangelist. 1 jaar 7 maanden ik blijf daar. Daarom, ik heb niet papieren. ATV, ik kijk het programma. Pedofiel blijft 6 maanden evangelist. Pedofiel is straks vrij. Ik begrijp niet wat, ik heb niet papieren, ik slecht met pedofiel, zo ik blijf 1 jaar 7 maanden evangelist. Voor wat? Voor papieren? Is mijn fault, zo mijn land kapot maken? Is mijn fault? Nee, ik denk nee.
Family die. Everybody die. Africa. Why people not happy for Africa? Why people not happy for Africa? European people, they kill people. For Africa people, it's no good. Waarom every time Africa people they fight? Because for European people they do bad every time for Africa. Like for Congo, Liberia, now Nigeria too is dying. Ethiopia is people they die. Zimbabwe. Why? Sierra Leone, people they die. Every time people they die for Africa. It's not good for like that. People they come for Europa because it's problem for Africa. Africa is not good. Before, yeah, it's nice, but now, every time, everything is bad, bad, bad. Hospital is not have hospital. Not have money. Now they go for 10 years for Holland. No papier, no work, no house. Not life. Holland people, white people, open eyes for black man. One talk, the same color, black man. Everything you come for, take for Africa, they bring for Europa. Europa, nothing they bring for Africa. Only they take for Africa, they bring for Europa. All Europa. See no Africa today, Europa finish. Too much kids, they sleep outside. No work. Only they hear, oh, Congo have money, they have money. Congo have gold, they have diamond. Since I sit for this country, I there for Congo. No see diamond for my eyes. No see gold for my eyes. Oh, they hear, oh, diamond, diamond. People, they suffer. Belgian people, they thief money for my country. Louis Michel, they thief money for my country. I think for my country president, Congo people, everything changed. You take Rwanda people, president for Congo. It's not normal, like for Holland. You take one Belgian people, president for Holland. Why? For what? Why Africa people they suffer? Like, look, for Holland, now I did for Holland. No fight. It's nice. It's good. Everything is nice. Can I take for this place? It's nice country. Why not for my country too is like that? No, people they suffer. No fight. Yeah, it's quiet. People they stay good. Why for my country not like that?
We'll jump to Janneke's story.
Toen altijd mensen nieuw willen binnenkomen en iemand nieuw komt, nieuw, weet niks taal, niet Nederlandse taal. Altijd roepen mij, zeggen, kom helpen ons en vertalen doen voor deze mensen.
Dus ik vond dat raar. Uiteindelijk heb ik later trouwens snel dat nummer weer van mijn arm af gepoetst. Toen zijn we naar een politiebureau gebracht, het politiebureau in Zeist. Daar hebben ze foto's en vingerafdrukken gemaakt van me, omdat ik mijn naam niet wilde noemen en mijn paspoort niet wilde geven. Ik deed dat om solidair te zijn met de mensen waarvoor ik actie voer. Namelijk die mensen die niet de juiste papieren hebben of mogelijkerwijs helemaal geen papieren. Op een gegeven moment kwamen ze naar me toe en ze zeiden van... je wilt nog steeds je naam niet zeggen en je paspoort niet geven? Nee, zei ik. Dan zeiden ze, dus nu de strafrechtelijke afdeling is afgelopen. Ik kreeg een dagvaarding mee voor een rechtszaak. En dan gaan we u nu overbrengen naar politiebureau Utrecht. Alwaar wij u in vreemdelingenbewaring gaan zetten. Ik dacht, dat gaan ze nooit doen, want ik ben gewoon Nederlands. Ik heb ook Nederlands gepraat en... Ik dacht van, nou, dit kan niet. Je kan Nederlanders niet onder de vreemdelingenwet zetten. Maar dat bleek dus wel te gebeuren. Ik was met nog iemand, gingen naar in een busje, werden we naar het politiebureau in Utrecht gebracht. Daar kregen we een cel toegewezen, ieder een eigen cel. En na verloop van tijd moest ik bij de vreemdelingenpolitie komen. Daar werd ik verhoord. De vragen als... hoe lang woont u al in Nederland? En toen u in Nederland kwam, waar heeft u zich toen binnen 3 dagen gemeld? Toen zei ik nog van nou, ja, ik ben me niet binnen 3 dagen gemeld, want toen was ik een baby toen ik geboren was. Ik denk dat mijn vader me heeft aangegeven bij het gemeentehuis, maar dat kon ik natuurlijk zelf niet doen. En dan dat soort absurde situaties kwamen er uit die vragen. Het zijn vragen die gesteld worden aan vreemdelingen. En als je die aan Nederlanders stelt, krijg je gewoon vreemde situaties. Ze zeiden dat ze me een jaar konden vastzetten in vreemdelingenbewaring als ik mijn naam niet wou noemen. Ik zei, ja, maar ik ben niet een vreemdeling, ik ben Nederlands. Toen zeiden ze, ja, maar we gaan u wel in vreemdelingenbewaring zetten, want u gaat zich verzetten tegen uw uitzetting. Ik zei, nou, waar wouden jullie me naartoe uitzetten dan? Zeiden ze, ja, dat weten we niet, want we weten niet waar u vandaan komt. En ik maar telkens zeggen, ja, ik kom uit Nederland en dat kun je zien en dat kun je horen. Maar zij wilden daar gewoon niet aan. En na een aantal uren werd ik voor de hulpofficier van justitie geleid. En die zei, ja, we gaan nu een vreemdelingenbewaring doen. Daar was dus niets meer aan te veranderen, blijkbaar. Nou, die nacht ging ik dus als vreemdeling de cel in. En ik vond het bijzonder vreemd. Ik had nooit gedacht dat ze hadden wel gedreigd bij andere activisten dat ze dat zouden doen. En die andere activisten hebben toen maar hun paspoort laten brengen. Maar ik dacht van, dit gaan ze gewoon niet doen. Ik geloof niet dat ze dit echt willen doorvoeren, of dat het ook kan. Maar ja, blijkbaar kon het dus wel. En ik vroeg me af hoe lang het allemaal door zou blijven gaan. Hoe lang ze dit zouden willen blijven volhouden. Of ze ons ook daadwerkelijk in een vreemdelingengevangenis zouden willen wegstoppen. Nou, na een aantal dagen bleek dat ze dat wel degelijk van plan waren. Ze hebben eerst nog geprobeerd om het me zo moeilijk mogelijk te maken. Ze lieten me niet luchten met iemand anders. Ik was 24 uur per dag alleen. Ik mocht wel af en toe luchten, maar ook dat was alleen. En ja, er gebeurde eigenlijk ook niet zoveel. Er was nog een keer een verhoor, maar dat kon met advocaat. Maar advocaat was niet. Toen zei ik, nou, ik heb hier geen zin in. Ik doe het wel met de advocaat erbij. Breng me maar terug naar mijn cel. Maar nee, dat vonden ze ook niet. Want toen gingen ze me dus nog uitgebreid vertellen wat ze allemaal met me van plan waren. Als ik mijn naam niet zou noemen. Nou, uiteindelijk, dus dagenlang alleen geweest te zijn, vonden ze het welletjes. En ik eigenlijk ook wel. En toen zeiden ze van ja, we gaan je morgen of misschien vandaag nog overplaatsen naar een vreemdelingengevangenis. En dat gebeurde inderdaad. Na nog een dag kwam er een busje voorrijden. En ik zal maar zeggen, mijn collega-actievoerster en ik werden naar Noorderzand gebracht. Noorderzand is een gevangenis waar vrouwen zitten zonder verblijfsvergunning met kinderen. Alleen voor vrouwen is dat. Het is een heel erg waard. En kwamen we daar binnen. En toen we eenmaal... eerst werden we met z'n tweeën opgesloten in een kamer. Een soort kinderkamer. Er lag wat blokjes en wat poppetjes en een poppenhuis was er. Mijn collega Jip, die ging naar binnen. En ik moest blijven wachten in die kinderkamer. Er lagen ook wat blaadjes. Ik zat een blaadje te lezen. Op een gegeven moment komen er 2 mannen binnen, waarvan die stellen zich voor. En de ene zegt, ik ben de directeur hier, de locatiedirecteur van Noorderzand. Welkom. Het is hier een gemoedelijke sfeer. U zult het wel naar uw zin hebben. En het is sowieso beter dan buiten aan het hek zitten. En dan was het zo dat ik een aantal maanden geleden daar voor Noorderzand inderdaad ook aan het hek gezeten heb. Ik heb dat daar het centrum geblokkeerd. En de man herkende mij en zag aan mij dat ik wilde dat niet ontkennen, zag aan mij dat ik dat had gedaan en dacht toen van, oh, maar deze mevrouw die wil ik hier liever niet hebben in mijn centrum. Want ja, ik weet niet wat hij dacht, maar hij was in elk geval niet blij met mijn aanwezigheid daar. Vervolgens kreeg ik daar een telefoonkaart van €5 en een pakje sigaretten. En dat was een cadeautje, zeiden ze. Maar dat bleek niet zo te zijn, want dat was wel een cadeautje. Maar dat moest je dan ook weer terugbetalen.
Nou, dat was...
Any chance chance of some lights around here so we can see ourselves? Or not? We have very little time, I'm afraid, for questions. I'm sorry about that, but I think it was very important to be able to see the piece and to see what you're developing. I kept thinking again of some hauntings from this morning and some interesting things that Paul Gilroy was saying. And one of the things he remarked on is this is also the center of the world here. We have to find out why we're here or who's here or how we got here. And I think this film is a kind of an interesting attempt to think that through, this sense of being here. I'm just wondering, how you came across these people and their stories.
Yeah, well, we have done a few works before in relation to migration in various ways, and also in relation to refugees. So we've already, gotten to know quite a few people who are involved. So, each time you get to know more people and builds up. So, like I said, through this, or through some people we knew from NGOs, they got us in contact with, they told us about this wake at the deportation center in Rotterdam, at the airport. So we went there, and there we met this group that was visiting the prisoners, actually visiting them during the church ceremony. And so we joined this group, and not much later they were actually expelled from being a visitors group, because there are also conflicts and stuff within that world. But I must say I went there 2 times to the ceremony, to a church within the detention center, and that was quite a weird experience, I must say.
Are you planning to make more of these portraits?
So this one that we see, that I showed now at the end, Janneke, that's just a new one, and I mean I just kind of worked on this fragment for this presentation now. But this in a way we have shown this project once. I mean, we showed it just on television screens or computer screens in a container in the city center of Rotterdam. It was like the first presentation, but I mean, we feel we are still just like starting with this project. Probably, we have a feeling that it will. And we are really curious which kind of dimensions it can take.
Well, especially the last interview, this idea of this ambivalence, this complete ambivalence about the rules. It's kind of fascinating.
I mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, like many of the people say, is that I mean, and that's the ambivalence of the like what they say here in the human rights statement, that arbitrary, no one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. I mean, what is going on is arbitrary arrest in these detention centers, because I mean, you are arrested and there is no time frame. The time frame is you are put there the time frame is short, they say, but as you saw, that stretches up to almost 2 years, or 1 year and 7 months, 1 year 11 months, 12 months, 13 months, 9 months. I mean, these were just the people we met, and they had all been between 3 months and what was it, 17 months.
Well, the lights came on, so I guess that's a symbol. I have to open it to the floor, so now I can see if there's any hands up. Lisbeth?
I have a very simple question, actually. That the police came into your house a couple of days ago, did that have anything to do with this piece?
Yeah, it was because no, it didn't.
Okay.
No, it didn't. It has to do with where I live, in the center of Rotterdam, I guess. I mean, 2 years ago we had them, similar group of people, 4 times, I think, in 1 month. And the last time we told them just like, hey, please, I mean, are you stupid or something? You've been here already 3 times, but this was the first time that they really just like, I mean, afterwards I regretted having let them enter my apartment, but I mean, it was absurd. She just like immediately just one of them just went the other side in my apartment and started looking into closets, and and like really telling me that it was her right and that she was following police procedures. And I said to her, I don't care if you're police officer or president of the Netherlands or whatever. You have to follow certain other procedures, which are just, you are visiting my home, and you don't have any right to behave in this way. I'm not a suspect, and they didn't have any house warrant or anything like that, so it was quite. And but I didn't. I said okay, and so they were at the end. They were quite annoyed with me because I got quite angry, and I said that I wouldn't give them any information on me except if I would get all the information on them the same. So I got their names and numbers and stuff.
You have any more questions? I can't see up there, so anybody is looking to ask from above, you'll have to wave.
Last story, what happened with the...
Sorry. Yeah.
The last story, what happened with the woman? How long was she in the detention center? The Dutch woman, eh?
Yeah, at the end she was one day there, so she was in only one day. But there was, I think, they are also testing. The police is also testing, so they also don't dare to. And actually, there has been a court case about this, and she was fined off. They wanted to try to fine her off 50 days in prison and 100 days onvoorwaardelijk. What's that? Probation, yeah. And at the end she was fined €300 for this one and another one. So, and so the judge was on her side and said just, they didn't have the right to do this. But after this happened, they have already done it again, actually. So they're trying to, push the borders. And another thing that comes in the interviews or in the testimonies is that or refugees are declared ongewenst, like a persona non grata, unwanted person. And I got a mail, through some NGOs and stuff. I got a mail forwarded that's going on in the official organization or within the government, that they have issued a paper or like a memo that they're going to try. That's going to be their cutting edge stuff. They're going to try as much as they can to declare people ongewenst, even though they know that it's shaky, that they know that they're pushing the borders, but that's what they want. So they want to win new lands in the right of claiming people to be unwanted. So that's the policy now.
Any more questions? No, okay, on that sobering note, maybe it's good sometimes to end on a sobering note, thinking about the here and the now. I would really like to thank Ólafur, and thank you for your flexibility, also for changing your presentation from yesterday so Arthur could come, so I really appreciate that too. And hi to Libia if you do see us from Spain. And thank you everybody for a wonderful day and great questions, and your presence here as usual is much appreciated. We are going to now go to, I hope, a really fantastic performance, which is Surasi Kusulwong, and it's called, let's see, it's a rather long and elaborate title. It's called €1 Suitcase Market, and then in brackets, arrived 8th of September 1608. I think there's a story to that. And it's a market action and performance by Surasi Kusulwong. So I suggest you get your €1 out and go to the tent. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.